What's up guys, this is the Japan Financial Guy, Andrew, and today we're going to look at the Bank of Japan and one of their economic meetings that they had in the city of Hiroshima, which happens to be where I live. Now this economic meeting happened in September. They had a speech with local leaders here in Hiroshima. The Bank of Japan Hiroshima division participated, as well as the deputy governor of the Bank of Japan. And I didn't know about this right when it happened. I found out about this through a Facebook group that I'm involved in called Investing from Japan, and there's some great guys in there, guys and girls in there that contribute some information about how you can live just a better life preparing for financial independence in Japan. So here I am. Go ahead and like the video if you enjoy, and we will go ahead and jump right into it. So I'm not going to go through everything page by page because it's a very long report, but I am going to talk about, just summarize some of the things that were talked about and go over some of the charts that they had presented in their presentation as well. It was all translated in English so that we could have some of this English information about the economics going around, happening here in Japan, as well as some of the things that are happening in Hiroshima. So one of the things that they said that they're going to have to analyze is, just the current situation and the outlook for Japan's economy, is just what kind of economic developments and mechanisms are needed for recovery. And basically, just to summarize all this up, it just goes down to spending. And so you talk about spending, and why is spending money important? Because the more that money is spent, the more that it transfers to other individuals who then pay their employees to spend as well. And so the goods and the services are circulating better, and you have a more healthy economy. So they point out a chart here. Let me just pull it up real quick. Here it is. It's chart 2 on our chart 1. So the bank's forecast for economic activity in July 2021, this is based on a survey that they gave for, maybe 10,000 businesses. I believe it's called the Tankan, but we'll get into that later. But if you look here, after 2009, when we had that world global housing crash that really affected a lot of the world, we saw quite an increase in the economy here in Japan. It shows real GDP and nominal GDP, and nominal GDP is the GDP basically, and then real GDP is the GDP based on adjusted for inflation. So we're going to look at that dark blue line there. But if you look here, after COVID, there was quite a dip as lots of businesses had to close and the economy just was not circulating. People were not spending money. So in order to counteract this, there's been a lot of the quantitative easing, a lot of the money being sent out to you. Maybe you received, that 10,000 or 100,000 yen support money before. And the new Prime Minister, Kishida-san, now, he just is sending out some more support money to people who have children under the age of 18 or lower incomes. So you look and hope that the money given out is going to be spent into the economy and get things circulating again so that our GDP goes back up. So you look at 2021 quarter 2, it's at 539 trillion yen, and they're predicting that this is going to keep going up. You can see the numbers for 2023 that could surpass even, let's see, it says fiscal 2022 year could even go past the pre-pandemic rates. So I'm going to look at this second chart here that's based on inflation and deflation, and why inflation and deflation can be good and bad. Now, we talk about the inflation monster taking your money and the amount of money that you have in the bank and not being worth as much. So yeah, why wouldn't we want deflation? Well, deflation is actually very bad for countries, for for nations as a whole, because deflation, because your money might be worth more, you're not going to spend it as much. And so if you're not spending your money, then the company doesn't get the money to give to other people to spend, to give to other companies, to give to people to spend, and then the cycle is just not happening as fast. And so they have to, because the money that is being received is not as much, they have to decrease incomes and wages. There's downward pressure on the prices, decrease in the sales. All these things are very negative for consumption. And so the virtuous cycle here on the left, it shows how inflation, you don't want too high of inflation like the US right now. We'll talk about that later. But in Japan, the inflation is somewhere below 2%. I know it's probably around 1%. They're aiming for about a 2% inflation rate because if there's a little bit of inflation, it does increase spending because your money is losing value. So there's an increase in sales, there's an improvement in unemployment, and wages usually go up, and then upward pressure on the prices as well. So this is the virtuous cycle that the government is saying in this report that they are aiming for, and why they want to increase the inflation closer to 2%. So going to the next point in the report here, the current situation of the corporate and household sectors, a lot of the businesses in this Tankan business survey for 10,000 enterprises, they expect to see some good economic growth in the end of 2021 and 2022 and 2023. And so this is very good for Japan to see, a healthy level of inflation, unlike the U.S., and to see just an increased demand for the recovery of other overseas economies, as well as we're trying to improve the imports and exports here in Japan. Now, it says here, turning to household sectors, the employment and income situation has remained weak, although significant deterioration has been avoided, partly owing to policy support. And it's referencing a chart below. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that chart number 4. But you can see here the household sector, the number of employed people and the unemployment rate were right there at the beginning of the pandemic. You saw a huge spike in employment come up to over 10%, but very quickly people were able to get back to their jobs. So overall, employment wasn't hurt too crazy bad. Of course, there's lots of part-time jobs and students who maybe they were working at a restaurant that wasn't able to open, but they weren't necessarily, they didn't lose their jobs, is what I'm understanding from this percentage, because otherwise that percentage would be a lot higher, I would assume, with all these businesses shut down. But yes, I want to look at the U.S. unemployment rate. So let's see. Let's look it up here. I'll put this picture up. But yeah, hold up the United States unemployment rate, and if you look at the post-pandemic unemployment, it shot from almost 2.5% to 15%. Yeah, okay. So the U.S. seemed to have a much harder time after the pandemic as far as unemployment goes. And that number slowly went down and sits at around 4% right now, it looks like. So Japan rate is around about 6% of the labor force, or 4% if you're looking at that blue line. But yeah, anyways, so not too much different now perhaps than the U.S., but the U.S. did have a longer time of difficulty, it seems. And the Great Resignation, as a lot of people are talking about in the States, there's a lot of people not going back to those jobs after they got a lot of government help. So with the, expectations for hopefully positive growth in Japan, there are some challenges that the central banks will have today that they went over in this meeting. And a lot of those things that they addressed, let's see, they summarized 3 points here. And so they talked about actions on climate change. And this is kind of a global problem, that we are going to have to really focus on, as we have businesses using resources, and this is really affecting the emissions and the pollution that's going into the world. This could be a very serious problem down the road that we can't really ignore anymore. And so just with the more natural disasters happening around the world, a lot of these concerns are brought up, and so the central banks are trying to address that. So it says here in the report that even though natural disasters have been increasing, a good thing is the amount of deaths related to natural disasters has been decreasing. And so as maybe our technology is improving, or our systems for warning people about natural disasters, the structures that we build for safety, those deaths are going down. So let's take a look at the chart. Here is the chart here. Yes, okay, so you look at the earthquakes and the storms and the floods that are at least being reported over the past 60 to 100 years. We are having way more flooding, way more earthquakes, just about everything here. Storms and droughts are just happening way more. And I'm assuming this is around the world. Now, if we look at the amount of people that have died from natural disasters, of course, this just is going to change depending on the year and what kind of bad natural disasters happen. You can see the downtrend as we look at the past 20 to 40 years. And back to the economy note, we got this next chart here on the carbon dioxide emissions, and you can see China just leading the pack with the amount of carbon dioxide emissions, and the U.S. not in very good shape either. But you look at Japan line there, and Germany and UK just kind of going toward there's a nice downtrend going on. Whereas India, as India's economy is booming and the population is growing so rapidly, you can see that their carbon dioxide emissions are getting worse. And so this is why you see a lot of investments now going into the electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle market. Places to reduce emissions around the world. These types of companies are seeing a huge boost in investments, and it's just really something that needs to be addressed more, especially here in Japan. The next thing that the central banks of Japan like to focus on is price stability, and this goes back to the inflation rate. They're really focusing on that 2% inflation rate, and the reason for that, they list three things: securing policy room in order for interest rates not to stick to the lower bound, because they don't want interest rates to be too low, an upward bias in price statistics, and global standard of 2%. Okay, so global standard 2%, that third one there especially, it seems to be really being focused on by a lot of countries. And so in the U.S. right now, rates are over 6% or more, and they're seeing, huge problems as they've done lots of quantitative easing in the U.S. Almost 25% of their GDP, I think. We got a chart here. Let's see if we can find it. So you look at this chart, and it's a large-scale fiscal support in response to COVID-19 there on the right. And the U.S., 25% of their GDP they used as support to help people out, and that's a lot of money. Now, I'm not saying that it was good or bad, because if they didn't do it, a lot of the people in tough situations wouldn't have been able to survive, perhaps. And so you have Japan with over 15%, and Europe just over 10%, and some of the other emerging countries couldn't do quite as much. Now, just because Japan has not been as high in the inflation levels and kind of in a deflationary type of economy that's kind of rubber banded back and forth around the inflation rate being closer to zero, this quantitative easing hasn't affected as much. In fact, they want that virtuous cycle of inflation closer to 2%, which is the global standard, and doing some more monetary easing is going to help their economy. Yes, it might make the cash that you have sitting in the bank not be as worth as much, but it's going to help improve the spending, which is what we need in Japan. It's important as a nation. And so this is, a big concern for the bank as they're trying to really get us to be able to spend more money and get that inflation rate back to closer to 2%. The third point that they wanted to focus on was the financial system stability. And I just browsing over some of the notes here, I think that just having more support for corporate financing and just the stability of the financial system here in Japan is something, of course, very important to the Bank of Japan. So with these three things, you can really see they're all very helpful, not only for the GDP, but they're important for the health and the economy of the people here. So looking at the next point, they go ahead and specifically look at Hiroshima. Now this is good for all of Japan, but looking at the economy of Hiroshima as an example, being that the meeting was here in Hiroshima, it says the economic activity in the prefecture has been on a moderate pickup trend recently, although downward pressure has remained. The pickup in private consumption, especially for services, has come to a halt due to the lingering impact of COVID-19. Exports and production, mainly for automobiles, have remained under downward pressure due to the effects of supply-side constraints, such as semiconductor shortage, but the moderate pickup trend has been maintained. As for the outlook of the economy, is likely to gradually head towards improvement in vaccination progress and supply-side constraints ease. So this is good. So you can see as Japan has a very high vaccination rate, I believe it's over 75% now for people who've gotten 2 doses, or gotten the full dose, whatever that might, whichever company they went with. But you see most of the people in Japan getting the 2 doses, as Moderna is not as popular, I believe. But yes, we're getting back to that positive uptrend. And so it's a good time for us to look for a positive growth rate of the GDP and to really invest in things here in Japan and see more money being spent to help the economy. These downward pressures are coming from supply chain restraints like the semiconductors that we're seeing as well in the States and other countries just all over the world. They're seeing some of these issues as well. But here in Hiroshima, the trend is on the up. And it says next here, I've always thought that the impact of the declining and aging population is being overestimated. In fact, the global trend shows that there is no clear correlation between the population growth rate and economic growth rate per capita. And gross prefectural product per capita in Hiroshima Prefecture has been on an uptrend, albeit with fluctuations in recent years, even though its population has declined. Now, we've talked about this a little bit before, but yes, even though the population is declining, a lot of people are coming more towards the city, and they're spending more money, which is helping the GDP, which is helping keep that virtuous cycle. So we'll pull that chart right up here. Again, chart 15, so that you can see that here, the population and gross prefectural product per capita here in the Hiroshima Prefecture, even though the population is slightly going down, the real gross prefectural product is going up. So that is a good thing that the GDP is increasing. And yes, talking about population is a whole nother rabbit hole, but the government is making it easier for foreigners to get a visa. It's still very difficult. But they have the skilled worker visa options that are becoming easier to get. And they're trying to make other options as well so that you could come over here and have a career in Japan and help towards their GDP. One of the second things they mentioned, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, is improving on their use of digital technology, which of course is going to help as the Internet of Things and automated driving, all these things, artificial intelligence. It's going to help reduce the burden on the farming industry. It's going to help reduce the burden on nursery workers. Just all these fields that are suffering with the depopulation that's happening in Japan and have a hard time finding workers. It's really going to help the economy through enhanced productivity. The third area that I want to talk a little more about is the regards to tourism, and they focused on Hiroshima, which has some of the best tourism in all Japan. We have 2 World Heritage sites here with the Peace Museum that kind of shows some of the effects of the atomic bomb that dropped here in Hiroshima, as well as the Miyajima Island, which has a giant torii gate, it's being constructed upon right now, but hopefully sometime in the next year you'll be able to see it. And this is combined with other tourist spots around Hiroshima. Got a cycling course that goes to Shikoku. You got the Kure city nearby with a huge Japanese naval base. So anyways, they have put tons of efforts into improving their sightseeing. And before pandemic times, in 2019, we had a crazy amount of people that were coming to visit Hiroshima. And so as travelers are coming back in, of course, that's going to help the economy here. And this can be, related to about some of the other cities in Japan as well. We were really hurt with the Olympics and not being able to have people come in from other countries and help contribute to the economy. But, just with the nature of COVID-19, we see more and more that we have to deal with the pandemic and live with, Corona, and find out how best to do this quantitative easing and to get back on this uptrend that they're really expecting. So they're positive, and they say they see a lot of this happening right now. So it all comes down to, in conclusion, they write, to striking a balance, to having a good balance between the economic growth, to achieve that economic growth, but to deal with the uncertainties that things like the pandemic bring and some of the risks of a deflationary economy. I want to look at some of the charts that we didn't get to look at that were in the report that we didn't go over, but here's one on the household sector that shows the change of employee income in Japan over the past 15 years or so, and it really goes up and down. You see actually it dipped a couple times there into a negative period. So even before the pandemic, things weren't necessarily growing. And I know, in the company that I've worked for in the past, that it's really hard to get raises in Japan. And it's based a lot on age, more so than your skill set. But anyways, I wanted to compare that. So here's a chart of the U.S. from the Bureau of Labor. And it shows, that the U.S. year-over-year change in wages has really stayed in that 2 to 3% area, that 2 to 3% range, and even dipped a little bit during the pandemic. Now, we hear about wages, the Great Resignation, where people are asking for more higher wages, and a lot of people are not going back to work because, why not when they're getting all this government easing money in their rethinking and reevaluating their lifestyle. It's a little different maybe overseas, especially in the U.S. compared to Japan. But yeah, you can just see some of the ways that people are dealing with that differently in Japan. Now I want to look at the next chart here, and it's talking about the expectations for the the outlook of Japan's economy. And this, on the left side, it says, chart 7 here, it says the growth expectations remaining steady, that Japan's real economic growth rate has gone down quite a bit since that bubble in the late 80s that crashed kind of in the early 90s. Now, you can see how much they expected it to grow and remain steady, 4 or 5%. And then when the crash happened, they expected it to not be as good. Now, you can see after the 2008, 2009 housing global crash that happened, that it dropped down quite a bit to more than it has. The expectations were the lowest they'd been in the past 30 years, but now we kind of see that little uptrend starting again. So if the expectations are good, there could be some good potential for the growth here in Japan. And the last thing I want to look at is this consumer price index chart, and it talks about the inflation. Consumer price index also has it's a good indicator of inflation. As things get more expensive, sometimes that shows that inflation's happening. And you look at Japan, and the kind of crazy thing, you look at that red line, it says less fresh food. So they're having some food shortages, and so the consumer price index for this food went up and down, starting post-pandemic. The prices went down quite a bit for some reason, if I'm reading this chart right. And if you look at the mobile phone charges, which is kind of unique, but they put it in here because back about a year or two ago, I believe, the Rakuten Mobile came out with a new phone plan that was, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 yen a month, which is about 30 or 40 US dollars. And all the other phone companies were astonished. But you're paying, usually 8,000 yen a month or more, almost double. but it wasn't necessary. You know, they didn't have to keep as many employees to do these phone plans anymore just because of technology. And I think them doing that forced lots of other companies to bring their prices down. And so you see that the spending on the mobile phone charges for the economy has gone down quite a bit. But in the opposite, you see energy, as well as the go-to travel campaigns. It shows that as well. But energy, it would consist of gasoline, electricity, gas, petroleum prices, things like that, it says. So this was a great report, and I was excited that I was able to see it in English, so thanks for whoever translated it. And if you really liked it as well, hit that like button so that I know, because I would love to go, if there's interest, I would love to go try to find more like it and talk about it so we could learn about how things are progressing here in Japan and around the world. Yeah, just had a great time going over it with you. So let me know in the comments if you found something that you learned, or if you like something to add to help everyone else out. Subscribe, because we'll like to do more videos in the future like this, as well as specific topics about things really specific to Japan, and broader topics that apply to people all around the world. I have a Twitter, so if you want to follow it, it's JPN Financial Guy. And yeah, I just hope to see you in more videos. Go ahead and save your sayonaras, and I will see you when I see you.